Hi all, welcome to CodAffection. In this video, we'll be discussing how to organize a Program.cs file in an ASP.NET Core Web API project. So here is the initial Program.cs file and here is the final output. Actually, this is the third video of the series explaining ASP.NET Core identity with a Web API. In previous two videos, we have discussed user registration and user authentication with JSON Web Token. Links will be there inside the video description and inside the first comment of this video. Now without further ado, let's get started with the topic. Before getting into that, we should be familiar with the C# extension methods. Keep in mind that it's not static methods, the feature is called extension methods. Now consider this part as our Web API project. Into that we have added a necessary framework called ABC. Now suppose inside that we have an interface or class called original. The implementation of this type original is already done within the framework with its own methods and properties. Now using the C# feature extension method, we are going to extend this type original by adding our own methods from this Web API project here. Say we have an object org1 which is of the type original, that is from this framework here ABC. Now using the C# extension methods, we have added these two methods into the type original. Now let's see how it is done. So first of all, we have a static class. Inside that we have two extension methods for this type original. All we have to do is the method must be static and the first parameter to the method should be of the type original. And make sure that the parameter is prefixed with this keyword this. Then such a method will act as a method defined inside the type original. And that's how we are able to invoke these two methods from the same type. Even though both of these methods are not there inside the original implementation inside the framework here, we could add methods like this from our Web API project like this. Finally, there is a warning. Make sure that there is no such method already present inside this original implementation here. We can't override an existing method with this feature extension methods. Now we are going to make use of this feature for organizing the Program.cs file. Now first of all, inside this Program.cs file, let's add extension method to the type of this services collection. You could see that it is having the type of this interface iService collection. So to be specific, we are going to add an extension method to this interface iService collection. For that, first of all, I'm going to add a new folder called extensions. Now inside the new folder extensions, we are going to add a C# class file corresponding to this outer static class here. So here we go. Inside the new class we are about to create, we'll be adding extension method related to ASP.NET Core identity. So I will name this class as identity extensions. Now some of you might have noticed it. The outer static class name is nowhere mentioned while invoking these containing extra methods. See? And for the same reason, we should be providing some meaningful name for the outer class. Like we have given here. Inside this class, we'll be only having extension method related to ASP.NET Core identity, and thereby you could easily navigate the extension method inside the project. So first of all, we have to make the class as static class identity extensions. Now I'm going to add an extension method for what we have done here, in which we have added services for identity handlers and corresponding entity framework stores. So here is the new extension method, public static void. I will name the method as add identity handlers and stores. Now we have already made this method as static like we have seen here. Now we also need a parameter of the type iService collection, which is the type of this services here, iService collection. So here we go, iService collection, and I will name this parameter as services. As a prefix, we have to use this keyword this. So here we go. Now this method add identity handlers and stores became an extension method of this type iService collection. So you can invoke this method from this type iService collection from this program.cs file like this. builder.services.add identity handlers and stores. So this is the method that we have just added, the extension method. Now let me cut this and pasting the same inside this new extension method. The iService collection is already here as a parameter, so we can invoke these methods from these services here. So here we go, services dot add API endpoints and then add entity framework stores. So this is how we are going to add extension method throughout this program.cs file. Now the proper naming of extension methods like we have done here will help you to remove comments like this. Now here we have configured the properties of user, password and email address for user registration. So to do the same, I'm going to create another extension method. For that, I will just copy paste the signature of this method. I will name this method as configure identity options. Let's move this statement into the new method. We can invoke this method from this services parameter itself. So here we go. Sorry, here we need an extra curly bracket. That's it. Now we can invoke this new extension method from this program.cs file. builder.services configure identity options. So hope you are realizing that how C# extension method is helpful to organize codes like this. Now we could make this even more better. Instead of returning void from this extension method, we can return this interface type iService collection. So at the end of invoking these methods, we have to return these services like this. Return services. Let's do the same for the second extension method also. We have set the return type as iService collection, and after invoking these methods, we have returned the services here. Now by doing this, instead of invoking these two methods separately from the services, we can change the invocations like this. This method is already returning an iService collection. From that, we can invoke this second extension method. So all we have to do is just change the invocations, method invocations like this. Okay. Now let's define an extension method for injecting the DB context here. It's not related to identity, so I'm going to create a new C# class file, entity framework or extensions. Let's make this class as static. Now here we have the extension method public static. Now instead of defining from start, let me copy this signature from here. I will name this method as inject DB context. Now let's move this statement for the DB injection into the new extension method here. We can invoke this method add DB context from the service parameter. Let's add the required using statements. Now to this method useSQL server, we have to pass the DB connection string that we have saved inside this JSON file here. For that, we have to pass this configuration from the program.cs file. So first of all, let me add a parameter of the type AppConfiguration. Let it be config, and we can invoke this method getConnectionString from this config object. At the end of this method, we have to return the services. So here we go, return services. Now let's invoke this method inject DB context from this program.cs file. That we can do through chain invocations like this. Into this method, we have to pass the builder.configuration object. Now instead of naming this method as inject DB context, we could have named it like add DB context. But such a method is already present inside the type iService collection. That's what we are invoking here. So that's the reason why we have named it like inject context rather than add context. As I already told you, we can't override an existing method with an extension method like this. Now, in previous video, we have added authentication services from ASP.NET Core with this method invocation. Inside that, we have given necessary configuration for JSON Web Token authentication. For that, I'm going to create a new extension method inside this identity extensions. First of all, I will copy paste this last extension method and let's clear everything inside that. I will name this method as add identity auth. Often I use this abbreviation auth to mention operations combining both authentication and authorization. At present, we have only added the authentication services. In next video in this series, we'll be adding authorization also. So that also will be done inside this method add identity auth. So let me cut this and paste the same here. Let's invoke the method from services parameter. Now here also we need the configuration object. So we have to add the second parameter like we have done here. Let me copy this and pasting the same here. Now let's replace this builder.configuration with config. Now back to the program.cs file. Let's invoke the new extension method add identity auth. As an argument, we have to pass the builder.configuration object. Now if possible, change the order of invoking this method for better grouping. Everything related to identity will be called in sequential order. So first of all, I will invoke this inject context. Then we have add identity handlers, then configuring the identity options, and then we have added the services for authentication and authorization. As you can see, the program.cs file is already getting cleaned. Now, as the next step, we want to add extension method to the type of this app object. Before doing that, I want to add one more extension method for statements related to Swagger UI. For that, I'm going to create a new C# class file, Swagger extensions. So here we have the static class. Now let me copy paste an already existing extension method. I will name this method as add Swagger Explorer. Let's clear everything inside the method and let's cut and paste what we have here. Let's invoke this method from this services parameter. Now let's invoke this method inside the program.cs file. Add Swagger Explorer. For now, I would like to keep this add controllers method as it is. Now we need to add few more extension method to the type of this app object. First of all, here we have the if clause to configure the Swagger API Explorer. For that, I'm going to add a new extension method to the Swagger extensions here. Let me duplicate this last extension method. Previously, we have been adding extension method to the type of this iService collection. But in case of this app object, we have to add extension method to the type of this class web application. So we have to change this parameter accordingly. Instead of this interface, we want to extend this class web application. I will name this parameter as app. We want to return the same type from this method. So let's change the return type to web application. Now let's rename this method as configure Swagger Explorer. Let's empty the method, and finally from this method we'll be returning this app object. Now let's move this if clause into the new method here. Now we can invoke the method app.configure Swagger Explorer. Now inside this region we have invoked this method use course for the sake of explaining the previous topic. Now if I were creating an extension method, I will be doing that inside a C# file like this, app config extensions. So here we have the static class. Let me copy paste the last extension method that we have created here. I will name the method as config course. Let's clear the method. Now let's move this method invocation into the new method here. Now we don't need this region anymore. Now we can directly invoke the method here, config course. Now you know what, for configuring the course we may need data from this AppSetting.json file. So in those situations we have to pass the configuration object like we have done here. So let me copy paste the same here. Now we have to add the necessary parameter inside this extension method. iConfiguration as config. Okay. Now let's add our final extension method for adding these authentication and authorization middleware that we can do inside this identity extension clause. For that, first of all, let me copy paste this extension method into the clause here. I will name the method as add identity auth middlewares. Let's clear everything inside the method and let's move these two method invocations into it. Let's cut this and paste the same here. Now let's invoke this new method like this. Actually, we could change this method invocation to the invocations here, so I will do this. So far, with the help of C# extension method, we have organized every method invocations related to adding services and configuring services like this. Now rest of the portions inside this program.cs file deals with web API methods. First of all, you could see this method invoked here, map controllers. It will configure or add routes from traditional controls like this weather forecast control. This is the default control that's already been there inside the new project template. So the routes from conventional web API methods like this will be added with this method invocation here, map controllers. But so far inside this project we have used minimal web API methods, and that's how we are able to define the methods inside this program.cs file itself. But doing all of them here kind of mess up the whole purpose of program.cs file. Now let's organize these web API methods properly. Now before this user registration and login web API methods, you could see this method invoked here, map identity API. We have invoked this method for adding routes from identity framework into this project. And rest of these web API methods are custom web API methods that we have added throughout this series. Now let's look how to organize these web API methods or the web API methods that we are about to add going forward in this series. We are going to use the same concept that we have used so far, that is C# extension methods. Let me walk you through it. Inside this controllers folder, I'm gonna add a C# file. I will name it as identity user endpoints. Like we have done for these extension classes here, we are going to make this class as static. Now inside this class we will be adding web API methods related to the entity identity user. For that, first of all, let me copy paste an extension method that we have already created here. So far we have been adding extension method to the class web application or the interface iService collection. But in order to work with minimal web API methods, we have to extend this interface iEndpoint router builder. I will keep the parameter name as it is, app, and I will set the same type as the return type of this method. Now let's rename this method as map identity user endpoints. Let's clear everything inside the method. So as I said already, inside this class we will be adding web API methods related to the entity identity user. So both of these web API methods will be added into this class here. So from this program.cs file, we can invoke this method map identity user endpoints. Now you might be asking this. Here we have added this extension method to the type of this interface iEndpoint route builder. But here in this program.cs file, we have invoked the method from the type of this app, which I present inside this program.cs file, which is having the type of this class web application. How it is possible? It is possible because this interface here is a derived type of the class web application. See, this interface is derived from this class web application. So the parent type can invoke the children methods. That's what exactly happened inside this program.cs file. We have already done the same while defining these two web API methods here. This method map_post is actually a method of this interface iEndpoint route builder. And here we have invoked it from the parent type app, which is having the type web application. See? So let me move these two web API methods into the new method here. Along with these web API methods, we also need these two classes. So let me cut this and pasting the same outside this class here. Now let's add the required using statements. Now here you could see an unresolved error due to this builder object. It was readily available inside this program.cs file, but inside this endpoint class it's not available. We'll fix that in a bit. Now we can organize these web API methods even more better. For that, outside this extension method, I'm gonna create a private method like this, private. This class is already static, so the containing method should also be static. And here we have the method create user. Now we are going to move this lambda expression into the new method that we have created here. For that, first of all, I will cut everything inside this lambda expression and pasting the same here. And let's cut these parameters here. Now from this method, we are returning an HTTP response. So we have to provide the corresponding return type for this method. That will be task of the type iResult. Now all we have to do is just replace this method in place of this lambda expression here. Now since the method contains asynchronous operations, we have to prefix the method with this async keyword here. Now let's do the same for the second web API method for the sign-in operation. Let me copy this method signature from here. I will name this method as sign-in. Now we have to replace the method parameters with what we have inside this lambda expression. Now let's move everything what we have inside this lambda expression. Now instead of this lambda expression, we can pass this method sign in. That's it. So with this method invocation inside this program.cs file, map identity user endpoints, we have mapped every web point related to the entity identity user. At present, it contains the web API methods for user registration and sign-in operation. Now in order to avoid repeating this part of the URL in all of the web API methods, I will invoke this method map group before registering the web API endpoints like this. So all of the containing web API methods will get this prefix in the URL. So we no longer need to repeat this part of the URL /API. So this is how we are going to deal with web API methods. Now of course inside your project you will be dealing with different entities. Suppose you are creating this web API for an e-commerce website. In those situations you will be dealing with orders. So to define web API methods related to the order, you will be creating a separate class like we have created here. For example, let me add the class file order endpoints. You will change this class into a static. Inside that, you can define an extension method like we have done here. That will be map order endpoints. So all of the web API methods related to the order can be added to the extension method like we have done here. At the end, in order to add such web API methods into the project, we can invoke the extension method map order endpoints here. So that's how to deal with web API methods. Now finally, we have to resolve this error related to accessing configuration data from the builder object. This builder object is not available inside this class here, identity user endpoints. But we could pass the builder object from this program.cs file like we have passed the builder.configuration in rest of the extension methods here. But that's not a best practice when it comes to web API methods, because we will be passing first to the map method here. From there, we will be passing the same to this method sign in. In order to avoid the inconvenience in passing the builder object, we can make use of dependency injection. Let me show you the proper way to do it. For that, first of all, I'm going to define a class representing the data inside this AppSetting.json file. Because inside these methods that we have created here, it is trying to access the configuration values. So first of all, I'm going to define a class inside this models folder, AppSettings. At present, with this class, I want to represent this key here, AppSettings. As you go further with the app development, you will be adding more key value pairs into this AppSettings. So all of those properties could be added to this class here. So at present, we only have this property JSON secret. So let me copy this and let's define a property with the same name, which is of the type string. So here we have created a property with the same name as that of this key here. Now back to program.cs file. Now like we have injected an instance of this DB context, I'm going to inject an instance of this class AppSettings with the corresponding value that we have inside this AppSettings.json. So here we go. From this services collection, we can invoke this method configure. Now here we have to provide the type of this class AppSettings. Now into this method, we have to pass this section here AppSettings. So here we go, builder.configuration.get section method can be called. Inside that, we can pass this section AppSettings. So with this statement here, an instance of this class AppSettings will be created, and the containing properties will be assigned with the value with the corresponding key value pairs from this section here. Now any web API method can access the properties inside this AppSettings if there is a corresponding parameter inside the web API method. So for example, for this web API method, sign in, we have to access this JWT secret. So we can do this. To this method, we'll add this parameter iOptions of the type AppSettings class, and we'll name this parameter as AppSettings. Now in order to read this key JWT from the JSON file section AppSettings, we could do this AppSettings. Inside that, we have this object value which is corresponding to the class here AppSettings. From that, we can access this property JWT secret. See, that's simple. Like this, you can access any property that is added to this class AppSettings. So that's how to do dependency injection for properties or values or informations inside this AppSettings.json file. Now finally, let me move this into a new extension method that we can do inside this class AppConfig extensions. For that, let me copy paste this extension method for the DB injection. I will name it as add AppConfig. Let's clear the method. Let's cut this and paste the same inside this new extension method. Instead of builder.services, we can make use of the services parameter. We already have this object inside this parameter config. That's it. Now let me invoke this extension method just after the injection of the DB context. Here we have to pass the configuration object builder.configuration. That's it. So that's it guys. In this program.cs file, we have organized everything into respective folders and files with the help of C# extension method. So before going forward, let's verify the proper working of the web API methods that we have done so far inside this project, that is user registration and user login. So let me run this project. First of all, let's create a new user. Let's make the request. So here we have successfully created the user. Now let's try to log in with the same credentials. For that, here we have the post request sign in. Try it out. Let's make the post request. Boom. So here we have the JSON web token as a result of successful authentication. So that's all for this video guys. In the next video, we'll be discussing user authorization. You can clone or download this project from the GitHub repository link given below in video description. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing it now. Please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues so that they can also benefit from this. Have a nice day. See you in the next video.